morning, church.
Good morning.
You know, somewhere along the line, I got taught what it meant not to take God's name in vain. Well-meaning Sunday school teachers and confirmation teachers in the basement of the church told me that to take God's name in vain was to say something in anger after you swung your hammer and hit your thumb. Or maybe when somebody didn't believe the thing you were trying to say, you would raise your hand and say, well, I swear. They taught me that God's name is too holy to be used for that kind of thing. And that's true. But it's also way, way too small. When we use God or faith or Scripture to cover over our wrongdoing, that's a way bigger offense against God's name. When we cherry pick verses of Scripture and use them for personal advancement instead of inner transformation, that kind of thing is an offense against God. This commandment is not about profanity, but about manipulation and misrepresentation. And I think that's what may be going on here in our reading from Isaiah as well. I find it profoundly comforting to know that these writings that are probably about 2,600 years old depicts people behaving in the way that actually kind of looks familiar to me today. There are people who are interested in performing acts of faith, but not interested in living them. People want to be seen as behaving a certain way, regardless of what it means for the people around them. The people that Isaiah is speaking to are frustrated with God. They're saying, God, how is it that we're fasting and you're not paying any attention to us? We're doing the thing. And God, through Isaiah, says effectively, I don't care how empty your stomach is while you're using your fists to hit people. You're fasting for show, but you're still exploiting your workers. You're acting like you search for me, and yet somehow you can't see your neighbor in front of you who's desperately in need. It's that kind of worship that takes God's name in vain. Isaiah goes on to tell us that the kind of fast that God is interested in is not one where faithful people are hungry, but one where faithful people make sure that nobody else is hungry. He says things like, the fast that God chooses is about loosing the bonds of injustice, about letting oppressed people go free. It's about seeing the person in front of you not as a project to be solved, but as a person whose flesh and well-being and livelihood are tied up with your own. Isaiah goes on to tell the people that they should not look away from their own kin. They should not turn a blind eye to people around them. He's saying that for people of faith, you don't get to say, well, God and I are all right, and then ignore the needs of the people around you. Because our relationship with God is tied up with our relationships with our neighbors. In fact, that language about kin is a little too small. I have a bone to pick with our translators. The word that's being translated here more directly would be flesh. as in bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. You may remember that's the way that Adam describes Eve when he sees her. Not that they are biologically related, but that Adam recognizes the full humanity of someone else. So when God says, don't look past your kin, it means that there is no over there that we get to ignore. There are no people that we get to not pay attention to, because every single human being is made in the image of God. Now, it's at about this point that you might be saying to yourself, Pastor David, an entire world full of people that I'm morally responsible for caring about is an impossibly tall task, because I'm not sure that I actually love my literal neighbor. After all, their dog barks all day. They put those signs in their yard. And I don't know what they're doing that makes that smell come over the back fence, but I've had enough. And all of that's your literal, actual neighbor. It says nothing about things that are happening in our city or our state or our nation. Pastor David, I've called my representatives. I downloaded the 5 Calls app. I made my signs. I did everything that I could, and still every morning I wake up and brace myself to try to deal with whatever has happened overnight. If that's where you are today, then I hope that you will hear again from Isaiah. Because his words are not just words of condemnation, but they're actually words of hope and of promise. The promise that Isaiah offers is that when we feed the hungry and clothe the naked and shelter the unhoused, it's not that we are taking God to others, but that we are taking ourselves to the place where God has promised to be. It's the promise that whenever there are terrible things happening in the world, God will be found right there in the midst of it. Always. Friends, our God is a God of solidarity, not of dominance. Our King does not sit on a lofty throne demanding that we starve ourselves in order to prove our loyalty. Instead, we serve a King who surrendered his life on a cross to show that there is no dark corner of humanity where he will not show up. Isaiah says when these things start to happen, when this is the fast that the people choose, light will break forth like dawn. Not that it's a reward for good behavior, but God is describing there the thing that happens when we share with others what has first been given to us. He describes an endless river flowing up and watering parched places, converting the deserts of this world into beautiful gardens. It's offering the kind of defiant hope that breaks through a shadowy news cycle. Isaiah says that this is the way that we become repairers of the breach. It's the way that we start to stitch back together the torn apart parts of our world that have been ravaged by greed and power. It's how we rebuild city streets, those things that connect us together, that make it possible for us to relate to one another. So friends, when all seems terrible or scary or hopeless, we can trust that Jesus is there in the midst of it all, shining light forth, bringing life out of the valley of the shadow of death, meeting us there again and again and again, each new day, with love and mercy and grace. Friends, let's pray.